Voltaire was one of the most influential voices of the Enlightenment, an era defined by its challenge to tradition, dogma, and absolute power. He was exiled, imprisoned, and censored, but never silenced. He used his sharp mind and humor to challenge authority in ways that were both impactful and impossible to ignore. In a society governed by monarchs and clerics, he didn't just question authority, he ridiculed it, because he understood something profound. If you can make power look absurd, you can make it look illegitimate.
Doubt is not a pleasant condition, but certainty is absurd.
Born François-Marie Arouet in 1694 in Paris, he was educated in classical literature and rhetoric at the prestigious college Louis le Grand. Even as a young man, he demonstrated unusual intelligence, a biting sense of humor, and an instinctive distrust of institutional authority. In a time when criticizing the church or the monarchy could lead to imprisonment or exile, Voltaire's outspoken nature wasn't just bold, it was dangerous. And in 1717, at the age of 23, Arouet was imprisoned in the Bastille for allegedly writing satirical verses that ridiculed the corrupt lifestyle and rumored scandals of the French ruling elite, implying that the regent himself was morally unfit to govern. The punishment wasn't unusual at the time. The monarchy often used censorship and threw people imprisoned without trial as a way to silence anyone who criticized those in power. Yet, rather than silence him, the experience solidified his oppositional stance and set him on a path of a lifelong critic of tyranny and dogma. During this period, he adopted the pen name Voltaire.
I have never made but one prayer to God, a very short one. O Lord, make my enemies ridiculous. And God granted it.
Voltaire's most famous rallying cry, "Crush the infamous thing," wasn't just aimed at the church or monarchy itself. It targeted a broader system, a culture of superstition, fanaticism, and intellectual repression in which challenging authority was treated as a sin. For Voltaire, organized religion was not simply misguided, it was politically dangerous. He saw how, once institutionalized, religious belief could be used to discourage independent thinking, demand obedience, and justify injustice. In his eyes, it became less a guide to moral truth than a system for keeping people fearful, submissive, and uninformed.
It is forbidden to kill, therefore all murderers are punished unless they kill in large numbers and to the sound of trumpets. Superstition is to religion what astrology is to astronomy, the mad daughter of a wise mother.
Voltaire rejected both atheism and religious orthodoxy. He believed in a creator, but not in the authority of priests, popes, or sacred texts. As he often made clear, religion for him was a personal matter, not something to be controlled by institutions claiming to speak for God. Voltaire's opposition to church authority and the monarchy was a consistent theme throughout his career, but in his later years it became more focused on concrete action. He turned his attention to real-world cases of religious injustice, treating them not just as intellectual concerns, but as urgent social and moral crises. From his estate in Ferney, near the Swiss border, Voltaire transformed his home into a kind of Enlightenment nerve center. Though physically distant from the centers of power, he was far from isolated. He maintained one of the most active letter-writing campaigns of the century, composing over 20,000 letters to figures across Europe. His correspondence included Frederick the Great of Prussia, Catherine the Great of Russia, and Benjamin Franklin, individuals who, in their own spheres, were reshaping the political and intellectual foundations of the modern world. Voltaire used these networks not just to exchange ideas, but to influence policy, rally support, and strategically challenge religious and judicial abuses. He was not merely an observer of Enlightenment politics, he was an operator within them, what we might today call a public intellectual. He became an early master of opinion shaping, crafting essays, pamphlets, and targeted letters designed to provoke moral outrage, shape political discourse, and apply pressure to decision makers. This form of activism reached its most visible and consequential form in the Jean Calles affair. a case that, for Voltaire, symbolized the lethal consequences of religious fanaticism and institutional prejudice. Calais, a Protestant, was falsely accused of murdering his son to prevent a Catholic conversion. Despite contradictory evidence, he was tortured and executed in 1762. Voltaire's response was comprehensive and relentless. He collected documents, published articles, and reframed the case not only as a miscarriage of justice, but as a moral indictment of the religious intolerance that allowed Catholic institutions and authorities to suppress minority faiths. Voltaire's efforts eventually led to Calais being cleared of all charges, though only after his death. But it helped make a bigger point, that tolerance isn't just a personal value, but something every fair and reasonable society needs. In confronting this injustice, Voltaire demonstrated how principles of justice and individual liberty could be mobilized to confront entrenched power and reshape public opinion. It was activism through intellect, and it forced the world to pay attention. Voltaire's vision of a just society was built on three interlocking principles: freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and limiting the power of religious institutions in political life. These principles, now foundational to modern liberal democracies, were deeply radical in 18th century France, where the Catholic Church and the monarchy operated in near total ideological unity. But for him they were necessities for protecting reason from repression and individuals from institutional violence. Above all, he understood the danger of dogma enforced by power, and that where belief is enforced, truth cannot flourish. He viewed religious intolerance as both a moral failure and a political hazard. When religious institutions controlled the moral narrative, dissident became heresy, and critique became blasphemy. In such a system, speech was punished, and thought was policed.
It is dangerous to be right in matters on which the established authorities are wrong.
Voltaire's sharpest attacks were directed not at private belief, but at organized religion when it claimed the right to dictate laws, suppress ideas, and punish deviation. He saw the union of church and state not as sacred, but as strategically convenient for both. The clergy provided moral legitimacy, and the state provided force. In his philosophical dictionary and countless pamphlets, Voltaire ridiculed religious absurdities, exposed contradictions in scripture, and mocked the self-serving logic of clerics. His satire was not merely humorous, it was strategic, a way to reach the public and challenge the authority of institutions that could not be safely confronted through direct political critique.
Tyrants have always some slight shade of virtue. They support the laws before destroying them. Every sensible man, every honorable man must hold the Christian sect in horror.
He didn't call for the abolition of religion, but for its privatization. Religion, in his view, should be a matter of personal conscience, not public policy. States should govern according to reason and civil law, not religious doctrine. This belief extended to freedom of expression more broadly. Voltaire recognized that without the right to speak freely, there could be no intellectual progress, because truth itself depended on open inquiry and the ability to challenge dominant narratives.
Liberty of thought is the life of the soul. Think for yourselves and let others enjoy the privilege to do so too.
Voltaire's writing wasn't just clever, it was defiant. He confronted religious tyranny not with violence, but with reason, exposing how dogma had been used for centuries to punish thought and protect power. His writing was a form of resistance, an intellectual revolt against the idea that power and truth always walk hand in hand. Through argument and irony, he stripped dogma of its sanctity and made room for doubt, debate, and dissident, the very conditions, he believed, upon which any true free society must rest. Voltaire did not invent the idea of liberty, but he gave it a voice that echoed across Europe and beyond. Through biting critique, bold reasoning, and tireless advocacy, he advanced a vision of society rooted not in dogma or divine authority, but in reason, tolerance, and individual freedom. His writings helped lay the intellectual groundwork for the modern secular state, the defense of free expression, and the principle that no authority, religious or political, should go unquestioned. Though he died before revolution swept France, his ideals helped shape the movements that followed and continue to influence democratic societies today. In 1791, 13 years after his death, the French revolutionaries moved Voltaire's remains to the Pantheon, the national mausoleum in Paris. On his sarcophagus, they engraved the tribute to his influence. He prepared us to become free, and that, perhaps, is the most fitting summary of his legacy. Voltaire was not just a writer or philosopher, he was a force of reason and resistance, a reminder that words can challenge empires, that laughter can unmask lies, and that freedom begins with the courage to think out loud.